When I first started off looking after myself, I was stressing about unclean food. I would
Yeah.
stress about it, right, when I was younger.
Those which had high levels of stress and thought their stress was damaging
I,
for their health had a
yeah.
44% increased chance of dying from all causes.
Are there supplements that will help to raise testosterone? And what do people need to think about if there are? And what are people wasting their money on in your eyes? Shilajit, right? Everyone talks about Shilajit
Oh,
for
yeah.
testosterone, and people harp on about having the most benefits when they take it. They feel different. It's not typically something I would use for testosterone support, but what are your thoughts on it?
We can truly make a client-centric approach rather than a generic approach. And client-centric approach means you're giving them what they need at the right time, because the right thing at the wrong time is actually the wrong thing.
Is there any truth in direct light exposure to the testicles, or whether that's from, direct red light exposure to the area? Like, any truth behind this?
90% of varicocele happen on the left testicle. And now when we look into TV and media, particularly TV, we're seeing like the large level of feminization of male characters in children programs.
Welcome to another episode of the Alpha 21 podcast. We are joined today by Jake Carter of the Institute of Health, who has previously been on the podcast, and it was actually a very popular podcast. Welcome back to the podcast for a second time, Jake.
Thank you, Dom. It's a pleasure to be here, really is. And I'm looking forward to discussing all things testosterone for you and your guys, and unpacking how we can optimize their health, well-being, performance, and physique, and really aligning all of that together.
100%. I feel like it's going to be certainly a different perspective on this topic than what you would typically get through, general health and fitness platforms or advice. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into the depths of this. Now, obviously, we go quite far back in terms of we actually go further back than you probably realize, because I followed you for a long, long time, probably for a good 8 or 9 years, a few years prior to actually working together. I was following you, quite interested in what you do. But just for the listener, just give me an overview as to what your story into health and fitness and into what you do now with the Institute of Health.
Yeah, fantastic. So first of all, thank you for following me for some time before. And obviously we've known each other now for at least 6 years.
5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it's around that, right? So yeah, it's been some time. And over that time, there's been some transformations and some journeys and some changings of paths, so to speak. But ultimately, I started off self-employed. Actually, prior to self-employed, I was employed at the age of 15 in a gym as a gym instructor, getting paid £3.64 an hour, kind of working maybe a little bit in the gym when I maybe shouldn't have been, because I hadn't had any qualifications back then. But they knew that, and that was their offer, and I took that with both hands because it was an opportunity for me to move forward in the direction I wanted. But lo and behold,
labor, I love it.
Yeah, yeah, glorified slave labor, which I'm grateful of, because if I never would have done that, I won't be here right now. But ultimately, from that, I then had the opportunity to fast track my personal trainer. I became a PT, self-employed at the age of 16, working in a gym amongst people twice my age, twice my size, and they knew a lot more than what I did back then. So I had to really try to represent the product that I was trying to deliver to the audience. And this is where I was doubling down on my training, and I was very much into my physique training back then, and I was looking great, feeling okay, but just probably overtraining a little bit too much, which shortly led to an injury, a bulged disc in my spine, which kind of pulled me away from the training and kind of put me onto a bit of a path of depression, really, because the training was my new sense of identity. It was how I viewed myself and how I gained my confidence, because at school I really struggled because of my dyslexia and things alike. And it was a safe space where you could really perform based on effort rather than judgment. So anyway, that pulled me away from the training, and I learned more about nutrition. And from the nutrition, I started to learn more about, the anti-inflammatory impacts from it and how to kind of speed up my recovery, which I did. And then I didn't learn my lesson, because I was probably playing a little bit too much with nutrition. I was doing things like intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets, and I've got some challenges digesting fats. I have Gilbert's, I have APOE4 polymorphism, and some other things. So that soon led to some issues with my scapula, without going into all the TCM, and that led to a injury in my shoulder. Crazy for people which aren't really aware of how that can happen, but I'm more than happy to break it down if required. But anyway, that injury happened again, and it put me back onto the path of nutrition. So it was a nice nudge to probably pay a little bit more attention to nutrition. And that's where I started learning more and more. And then I became a team leader, PT manager. I was teaching nationally by the age of 18, internationally by the age of 22, 23, globally by the age of 25. I now teach physically in 12 countries, and I support students across 44. I oversee 20,000 clients annually through our students, and I mentor 1,000 health businesses on an annual basis. So kind of a big jump from here to there. But the gap was that obsession and that passion with learning more about nutrition. And it's just relentless studying, relentless investments. I've invested over, I think, $3 million into my education now. And, that only represents a fraction of the education what I have, because there's three things when it comes to kind of applied practice. There's education, exposure, and experience. And the experience is the larger contributor there, and that's the experience from working with a diversity of people from across the world, reading thousands of PubMed journals over the years, and going through a lot of mistakes, hardships, blood, sweat, tears, and everything else to kind of do what I do here today. And that's led to the outcome of me teaching this sort of stuff in the Institute of Health, and that's where we kind of credit people and enable them to do functional blood work and things alike. And we've also been developing over the years a health tech platform which enables people to also read blood work too. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Beautiful. So quite a journey from kind of being 15 on that gym floor and kind of not really probably knowing much about what you were getting yourself into.
Not at all.
All the way to, how old are you now? You're 30.
32, I think. 32.
I love it. Don't pay attention.
Yeah.
So it's probably fair to say that, through all of that kind of wealth of experience you've picked up over the past 16, 17 years, you know a thing or two when it comes to men's health, which is why we brought you on the topic of today. I'm sure you've worked, I know you've worked a lot within those realms, and you actually helped me a lot with my own personal health. That was how we kind of first engaged with each other. You supported me out of this, quite a dark place with my own health and opened my eyes to what was possible. But what's the difference between what you do and just, typical health and fitness education programs or platforms? Like what's different with what you do?
Yeah, great question, right? So what we really teach is functional health and functional medicine. And that's the marriage between conventional advances, that's the latest research, the latest technology, and traditional philosophies. And that's really appreciated in all systems biology perspective. So we can work with the human body rather than against it. And the essence of that is where we view the human body as a whole. And we don't look at the human body through the lens of a keyhole when identifying symptoms. And that approach enables us to take more of this global perspective, such as looking into digestion, looking into stress, looking into sleep, looking into, nutrition still, and all these other factors. Whereas when we look into health and fitness, it's quite ironic because the name health is in the title, but it's usually devoid from the industry. It's usually devoid. And people sacrifice not only their health to attain a physique, but also their mental well-being and many other factors in between. But the irony of that is that health is a physiological prerequisite to obtain any physique or performance-based goal. So if you prioritize your health, you're going to achieve the results faster, quicker, keep them for longer. And it's just going to be an easier journey because ultimately you're working with your body rather than against it. So when we look into what we do and why we're potentially different, it's because we prioritize health first. We also utilize the latest research. And the literature states this, right? There's a 17 to 23 year lag measure between what's researched today and put into medical practice. It gets worse than that. It's not just 17 years. It's after 17 years, only 14% of what's researched today is put into medical practice. That means the other 86% is forgotten about, is not utilized yet. So there's a massive gap. Yeah, there's a massive gap. So we're all about condensing that gap there and really learning and combing through all the latest research, all the highest quality data from, meta-analyses and large human studies and all these other factors. So people have reliable, high quality data to make informed decisions on rather than waiting decades to learn it and costing millions of lives in the meantime. And yeah, health and fitness is part of that. When we look into obesity, huge problem, but there's other kind of peripheral issues from health and fitness, which lead to other comorbidities too.
100%. I like what you said about the, I think it's important to be aware as well for people that I always say that health and fitness are not the same thing. Right? They're not the same industry, totally different industries, right? So I know this from bodybuilding. When I was bodybuilding, it is not healthy in any way, shape or form. And then you've got, obviously, when we progress into more health management side of things, it's just a totally different perspective on it. But like what we do, since kind of integrating a lot of this information into Alpha 21, is very much what you've said there, which is basically health first. And by doing that, people actually tend to get leaner faster, tend to build muscle faster, because they're able to, metabolize nutrients better, they're able to build hormones better, everything works just more efficiently. And that's been one of the biggest game changers in terms of the results that we get with people, is just always initiating the process with just making sure we're getting their health into as optimal of a place as possible before really pushing them in any performance direction. And that's just been a complete game changer, more so from how easy it makes it, like in terms of, less hunger, more energy, more motivation, more kind of enthusiasm around the entire process, because you just feel good. And when you feel good, everything's easier, right? Whereas when you feel like burnt out and, everything feels like drawing blood from a stone for every bit of weight loss, you're probably never going to stick it out. And I think health just lays that foundation, right? Now, we're going to talk about testosterone because that's kind of the topic of today. And what I want to get from today, and I know you're the man for the job with this, is some actionables, because I think there's a lot of like confusion around the topic of testosterone. And I just want to kind of get a bit of understanding about the actual topic as a whole. Like you'll see this, but I see that people want to blame testosterone for everything. They'll kind of say, I feel tired, I feel this, I feel that. It's got to be testosterone. And they're like seeking out TRT clinics left, right, and center because they just think that any problem they have as a man must be a testosterone problem, but it's just not the case. But how important is testosterone in the whole equation for a man? Like, how important is it? Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I do want to iterate something, and that's that you definitely do an incredible job at supporting people's health and also making them aware. It's not just supporting their health, but making them aware of how important health is, because most people, they have this level of unconscious lack of awareness that they don't actually feel that good because it's their normal and they get used to it. But obviously, I've seen the testimonials, the case studies you do, and everything else, and spoke with you, and everything there, and you do a phenomenal job at that. I think the listeners should really take that message and ride it home. So in regards to testosterone and how important it is for men, obviously anything within our body is designed and there for a purpose. So it is mission critical. But testosterone is a buzzword. It's a word which sounds hot and trendy, but there is obviously some kind of preliminary work which has to be done prior to optimize testosterone. It's very easy to speak about, all these gimmicky things, so to speak, and, go for what's new versus what's true. And the things which are true are the foundations, the philosophies, the principles, which often get overlooked and shortchanged for the convenience of modern day life. Unfortunately, those things, albeit they're not sexy, they are critical as well, right? Okay. So testosterone, obviously mission critical. It helps with our mental well-being. It helps with fertility. It can actually help us combat diabetes, depression. Also, people with low free testosterone have a higher risk of Alzheimer's. It's not just there for body composition. It's there for metabolic health. It's there for brain health. It's there for fertility, all these other aspects. So it is absolutely required. But unfortunately, what we are seeing more and more so in the industry is that people are noticing that they have low testosterone, or at least symptoms of low testosterone, and then they're overstepping these essential stepping stones to support their health and just going for maybe TRT, or maybe going for the latest kind of testosterone supporting supplement. And they're actually ignoring those things which are kind of the indicators, the red flags, the health handbrakes, which are holding them back from actually moving forward with their health, not just in regards to their endocrine system and the testosterone, but all dimensions of their life too. So in short, yes, it's really critical, but there's often more critical things to pay attention to, which aren't as sexy to look at.
And what would you say? I know there's probably a whole list of these things, but what would you say those less sexy things are that people need to pay attention to?
Yeah. So when we talk about testosterone, we can chunk this down into different areas, right? We can talk about the pathway of how testosterone is produced. And when just discussing about that pathway of how testosterone is produced, it brings a level of awareness to some things which often get overlooked. And we can possibly do that in a second if you want. But then there's also comorbidities. There's 10 critical comorbidities, which again get overlooked, which can really hinder someone's testosterone, and it can be quite prevalent in society. So maybe if we just quickly discuss that, I mean, the number one thing is obesity, right? And this impacts 40% of Western adults, so a large portion. And with obesity, there's things like increased aromatase activity, and that converts your testosterone through to estrogen. It increases adapokines and disrupts leptin, which then changes kind of all the required signals for testosterone to be produced. So there's a number of challenges with that, and that's often, recognized there as a factor for low testosterone, and accompanying that there's insulin resistance. But there's other things there which aren't really discussed, which are huge impacts, like sleep apnea. Sleep apnea can affect like between 1 in 10 to 2 out of 10 men. And sleep apnea, obviously, it's going to disrupt sleep, but that actually leads to increased sleep fragmentation, lower nocturnal testosterone, and that can also, with the hypoxia, the challenges with breathing during their sleep, that can impact the Leydig cells, and the Leydig cells are responsible for producing testosterone. So there's all these different things. I mean, there's varicoceles, and that's in 1 out of 6 men, right? And that's where there is this.
It's crazy that you wouldn't like.
It's more common than PCOS.
Yeah, it's crazy how common that is. Just explain what a varicocele is. Tell me what that is.
Yeah, so basically it's a dilation of veins in the scrotum. And that dilation of veins increases the testicular temperature, and that can then lead to some changes with the testicular blood barrier. Because everyone's heard of like the intestinal barrier, like leaky gut, and we also have the blood-brain barrier, but we also have the testicular blood barrier. And this gets heavily compromised when there is heat or oxidative stress. And when there's oxidative stress, that actually compromises it. And then that leads to challenges with the Leydig cells, which are responsible for producing testosterone, and the Sertoli cells, which are responsible for producing sperm. And it stops working as effectively as it should. Now, this actually happens in 1 out of 6 men. 1 out of 6 men, 15% of men have a varicocele. So like these are the things what we need to pay attention to. But it's like, if we're just going, oh, low testosterone, let's take tonkali, boron, let's take zinc, it's not gonna do the job.
Oh, like, just throwing money away, right? With regards to varicocele, because I think when you say like 1 in 6, that's a big old number.
Yeah.
And let's say someone suspected that, they're doing everything, they're taking all of the supplements, they're doing all of the, the routines and habits to try and get the testosterone up, but it's just not moving. How would someone go and check for a varicocele? What would they do? Yeah,
generally it's an ultrasound. So there's 90% of varicoceles happen on the left testicle, and they call it the nutcracker phenomena. Right. Okay. So 90% of the time it's the left testicle. It's also associated to the kidneys as well. Right. So you'd have an ultrasound. You can do physical examination in certain grades. You'd be able to see a prominent kind of like they call it like bag of worms, and you see like the kind of the veins, so to speak, in terms of their density and the occlusion there. But usually it is after a physical examination, it's an ultrasound, and the ultrasound then confirms that.
Interesting. Is there any kind of risk factors for this? Like, what kind of leads people to, is it kind of a genetic thing? Is it random, or is there something that causes this occurrence to happen?
Yeah, I actually have a varicocele myself, right? Okay. So it's really interesting. But there is correlations to deletions in GSTT1. So basically, there is a correlation. We don't know whether that's cause, effect, whatever. But an impairment in the body's ability to produce glutathione effectively. Okay, I also have that deletion in my genes, and I also have challenges with glutathione. Yeah, I slam. Yeah, all the time. I take it all the time. And that's because, autoimmune conditions and stuff like this, what I have to. It makes kind of sense, because if there was issues with the venous integrity from lower levels of glutathione and higher levels of oxidative stress, there is going to be more compromisation on the venous supply and the kind of integrity of the walls there. So it kind of theorizes, but we also know that there is potential correlations to impact sports or anything like this, and I've seen loose correlations with people which used to skateboard. I used to skateboard as well, so doing the kick flips and not quite getting it right, and then smacking yourself in the nuts. Yeah, so there's a few things. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's an interesting one, because most people haven't really come across the topic of varicoceles. So yeah, definitely want to pick up on another day. Now, you mentioned these kind of silent or kind of things that we should innately be taking care of, that are causing these issues. You mentioned being overweight, obesity is one. What else is there? Varicocele was another. What else is there?
Yeah, I mean, so there's
commonly, that people maybe neglect commonly.
Yeah, so I think if we stay on kind of the path of the comorbidities and dysfunctions and diseases, depression is a very common one as well, right? And when there's depression, that can actually change the gonadotropin releasing hormone which is responsible to then aid with the release of luteinizing hormone. So depression that can impact 1 out of 20 adults at any given time. So just the kind of many different factors there which can lead to depression. And then when someone has depression, the byproduct of that can also be low testosterone, not only the cause, but there's also things like chronic liver disease, which can blur into the lines of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? Which we see in about 1 out of 3 adults these days. And that's possibly due to increased endotoxins associated to the gut and other factors. But then there's also some other things as well, like sometimes have you ever heard of mumps? Have you ever heard of mumps, the viral, like
yeah, of course. I had mumps when I was about 20.
Yeah, okay. So 20 to 30% of individuals which have mumps actually have a viral infection of the testes after it. And that viral infection of the testes leads to testicular atrophy, and that can lead to long-term hypogonadism. So
I know it can make you infertile. They say that mumps can
that's how. Yeah. So these are all things what we need to assess and ask, because it's like all good and well taking zinc, making sure you're having 1 gram of fat per kilo body weight, blah blah blah, eating and maintenance. But if you've had mumps and if you've got testicular atrophy,
I've had 2 kids since I had mumps, so I think I definitely didn't quite get that side of it, but which I'm massively grateful for. But yeah, that's really interesting, because I did hear that at the time. Like, as an adult, if you get mumps, supposedly it can make you infertile. I know that was a bit of a worry at the time, I remember.
And there's a couple others, like hemochromatosis.
Oh, really?
Is iron overload. Yeah. So this only happens apparently in 0.5% of the population. I think it's more. But
it's so common. Do you mean hemochromatosis or the
hemochromatosis? Yeah.
Honestly, it's way
more common than 0.5%, I believe. Yeah, you see what I mean? But maybe we have an unhealthy bias, right? Because we deal with people wanting to improve their health and they've got their blood work done. So maybe the unhealthy bias increases the prevalence in our cohort. But nonetheless, what this can actually do is, you know how the body can store the iron overload, ferritin goes up quite high. The testes can also store iron as well. So it can actually go up higher. Yeah, and another thing, which is really, really cool, right? Well, cool if you're a nerd, but it can disrupt the CYP450 enzymes, right? And the CYP450 enzymes are part of that kind of biotransformative enzymes, right? So they're used in detoxification, but they're also used in conversion, right? And there's a particular enzyme, CYP11A1, and what that does is it converts cholesterol to pregnenolone. Right. But when you have hemochromatosis, there's a higher chance of that CYP11A1 being disrupted. So we have to think, if someone's got hemochromatosis, we might want to consider things like lactoferrin or IP6 or quercetin to help buffer some of the negative impacts from the hemochromatosis, so that iron overload doesn't damage the testes, but also doesn't disrupt the CYP450 enzymes. And these are just things where it's like the underlying factors which you can't avoid. I mean, if you have hemochromatosis, you can't avoid it. You can't out testosterone your hemochromatosis. So you have to look at the whole premises of you can't get dry in the shower. And these are the what diseases, conditions, dysfunctions do you have which you have to deal with first in order to address the testosterone, like we're saying at the start?
I must say, you can't get dry in the shower about 5 times a week. It's one of the best sayings ever, because that's what people are doing in society so much, trying to take supplements for issues where there's just much deeper things at play, and they're just away, right? I want to touch on something. I want to get your thoughts on something. I know, like, statins are becoming more and more regular use. Now, I know they work through, reducing. Well, you've got people who talk about, say, they purely isolate LDL cholesterol and reduce, like, the oxidation of LDL cholesterol. What's your thoughts on that? Like, do you feel like they affect HDL cholesterol? Like, what's your thoughts on that? Because I know some people say they don't, some people say they do, and that in turn reduces testosterone production. But what's your thoughts? And also on this topic quickly, because I want to know this, like, there's a lot of people who study this a lot who say LDL cholesterol we actually don't need it. It's not beneficial. What's your thoughts on that too?
Okay. Where to begin? Right. Well, let me just explain something. So you have cholesterol, right? Cholesterol is transported via HDL and LDL. Okay.
Yeah.
So HDL and LDL, they transport cholesterol, let's say, to the Leydig cells, the manufacturing powerhouse for testosterone. Cholesterol goes inside there, and then cholesterol goes inside the mitochondria. It goes through this star protein kind of complex, which pulls it inside the mitochondria. And inside the mitochondria, that's where it is converted through the CYP11A1 into pregnenolone. And then once it's converted into pregnenolone, it is taken out of the mitochondria, but remains in the endoplasmic reticulum, which then the pregnenolone will be going through a series of reactions to be produced into testosterone. So there's a couple of things what we have to take from that. We have to think, well, we kind of need HDL and LDL. HDL is the predominant transporter, by the way, of the testosterone to the Leydig cells. So the people which say you don't need HDL, well, HDL is the predominant transporter of the cholesterol to the Leydig cells.
I think it's LDL that people say is not required.
Yeah,
That's why I
definitely.
think you find on
people say that.
You say find on doctors' labs, it will say anything less than 3 is good. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't say like from 2 to 3 or whatever. It doesn't give you a range. It's like anything less than 3 is good. Right.
Yeah, and we need LDL too, because LDL, what this particularly does is it's antibacterial and antiviral. And we actually know, based on the large scale data, that individuals which had too lower LDL levels had a higher risk of dying from all causes versus individuals with high LDL levels. So it actually become more problematic when the LDL was too low versus too high, based off, the data in the thousands. So yeah, we definitely need it. And when we take into account, cool, well, we need cholesterol, we do need LDL for some things, we need HDL for others. What can we see in the data? Well, we see individuals taking statins. Now, granted, there seems to be a forgotten kind of approach for medication, and that's medication should have an intended purpose. Okay. It's not a lifelong sentence, hopefully. Okay. So an intended purpose means it goes in, does the job you're intending, you make, accompanying lifestyle changes, and then you come off the medication. That would be the best use case. But unfortunately, many people are prescribed medication, in this case, statins. And what we've seen from the longitudinal data is that there's higher risks of dementia and equally higher risks of gynecomastia, where they have a increased fat deposition on the breasts and develop more of those kind of lumpy tissues around the nipples as such. So we can see that. And then what we can cross-correlate that back to is obviously low testosterone. And we can then look into the kind of mechanism of how testosterone is produced with the LDL, the HDL, the cholesterol. Then we start to understand why that's the case. So we need the cholesterol, we need the LDL, we need the HDL. The thing which is really important, by the way, which is really, really important, which everyone misses here, is the mitochondria, right? The mitochondria is the first rate limiting step, really, in testosterone synthesis. So if people have any issues with the mitochondria, let's say they have high levels of oxidative stress, let's say they have high exposure to toxins, then we'd want to support the mitochondria, because that's ultimately where the cholesterol is pulled into and converted into pregnenolone. And if we don't pay attention to the mitochondria, then we're going to see a rate limiting inhibition of testosterone production all the way up at the very start. So this
topic, sorry, on the topic of mitochondria is going to be I want to talk about a few fact or fiction kind of topics that come up in the testosterone optimization space. And I want to get your thoughts on those later as we get into this. But that would be, I want to remind myself to talk about that. Cool. Right. I want to kind of get into I want to give the people, the listeners, something they can action, some clear actions in regards to this. We've kind of identified it's a fairly big problem. We spoke briefly about the kind of medication merry-go-round that people end them get onto. And they don't, I always say, like, when do you ever go to your doctor? And they give you medication, okay, but like you say, when do they give you like lifestyle prescription to eventually come off? Don't. They might recommend, oh, you should probably eat a little bit better, maybe cut back on carbs, maybe do a bit more exercise. It's never a prescription of do this, and in this amount of time we can then pull this out and you can live a healthy life. It just doesn't happen, right?
Exactly. I actually say if doctors learnt nutrition, it'd wipe out the health coaching industry.
Yeah. Oh,
which it would. Yeah. Which is very possible, because the doctors have that kind of societal authority, and people come to them with the problems, and they only have like 2 lessons typically, or 4 hours usually on nutrition, but nutrients dictate the language of our cells. So if they actually learn nutrition, then a lot of people would be fucked.
It makes you wonder, right? Because obviously they're very intelligent people to have gone through all the learning that they've gone through. And I know there are some amazing doctors who will off their own back, educate around what health, real health, nutrition, sleep, things like this, but off their own back. But why do you feel like it's on such a grand scale? They think it's like it's a system problem, right? In terms of
100%.
7 years. I don't want to say indoctrination, but it's 7 years of learning a particular way to do a certain thing without any focus on the other stuff. So anyone who goes through that, you're always going to come out delivering the same message, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's many different reasons why this would be the case. And I think the ultimate thing what we have to remember here is doctors aren't bad people. They had great intentions, but didn't have the right support system. So when we look into the statistics, we can see female doctors, they have the highest rate of infertility because they delay life milestones because of the placement and the work processes. So they have marriage late and start families late, but then they have massive challenges with fertility. They also delay all these other things and have massive sacrifices with high levels of stress, high levels of depression, higher levels of suicide than the general population. So they've really sacrificed a lot, spent a lot of money, spent decades ultimately, after placement and stuff like this, learning things. So there'll be an element of that where they're still hoping that the stuff what they learned is everything they needed to know. And that's what we see. Okay. And that's what usually makes it hard for them to have that level of acceptance that there might be more to helping people with their health outside of what they've learned. And that's usually the first level of acceptance. And we see that's growing more and more, and that's fantastic. The other challenge with this, though, is the regulation of kind of the governing bodies. And we can see, for example, in Australia, we have something called APRA, okay, and they're the governing body for doctors. With doctors, if you share a testimonial or a case study or even a Google review online, APRA will come down on you like a ton of bricks, and you run the threat of losing your license. So you're not actually allowed to share testimonials or case studies because it's not deemed within what they want you to do. So there is a massive level of control which actually stops them from doing certain things, or at least stops them from thinking other things are possible for them to learn.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
So, for example, anyone who, if there was a doctor who was using, I hate the term alternative health, but like if they were using, holistic approaches, they're not really sharing it. So then it becomes kind of like an unknown thing because no other doctor sees or hears it, right?
Well, we are seeing more like integrated doctors, right? We're seeing integrated doctors, functional medicine doctors, and it is now becoming less stigmatized. But go back 10 years, the alternative health scene was, pretty much deemed to be hippies, and, that might be true to a degree, but it's finally becoming recognized. And a big factor of this is biometrics, right? Like go back 15 years, everyone was wearing Fitbits and tracking their steps. Yeah. And then what happened is people then started tracking like the calories or in around the same time. And then after that, there was the Oura Ring and people were tracking their sleep and HRV. And now after that, people are getting the blood work done. So people are becoming more and more informed of health. And that's also forcing doctors to learn more and to become more equipped because people are doing their own research and going to the doctors with better questions, which means the doctors have to find better answers. And that's the one of the biggest student groups, what we're attracting at the minute are doctors, because they're recognizing that, hey, maybe there's a little bit more to helping my patients than just seeing them 3 times a year and not really making much difference.
I think it's so true to say that if they were to actually integrate, what I would regard as real health practices, there would be no need for any of what we do for people's health, because they would just deal with it on the front line through preventative care rather than I had a guy, I use this as an example, who in December he'd been put on 4 different medications over the past 20 years. It started with GERD, so he was on some a couple of different antacid medications,
PPIs and stuff. So
he was on those, and then over the 10 to 15 to 20 years he ended up with type 2 diabetes, metformin, all these different things. And not once did they kind of say, well, maybe you should change these lifestyle things that have created the issues. I always say we don't do anything. We're not doing any miracles. But in 6 months, he was off all medications. Blood sugars in optimal. No more symptoms at all. And it was that simple. 6 months of just actual focusing on addressing the root rather than just a band-aid approach with medication. It's like these guys have trained for a lot more than I have, and they're not able to fix that problem. They're just kind of loading medication upon medication, and it's not a fix, right?
Exactly. And I guess you could go deeper down the rabbit hole and start to speculate why, and I'm sure people can come to the decision.
I know we talk for a long time about that.
All
right, let's go into some actionables. I want to kind of get some actionables for guys in terms of the testosterone topic. what would you say people really need to be focusing on as the foundation? Then we'll go into some kind of fact or fiction on the biohacks. Yeah, all these additionals. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I guess body composition is going to be one of the biggest ones, right? Body composition. So if someone is obese or maybe even overweight, that's going to be one of the main things what they want to kind of address. And with body composition, we can look into all these different things, but ultimately, if we go to the bare essence, we just have to kind of make sure that we're maintaining health whilst expending more than what we consume. So that means maybe hitting a minimum of 7,300 steps per day and probably having a small deficit of 10 to 20%, and then probably coming back into a maintenance level after about 6 weeks or so, depending on your health markers and things like that, in the most bare essence form. So body composition, that's going to be a paramount one. We know there's many different factors as to why that can jeopardize it. Next up is sleep, right? So again, not sexy, but sleep. We know with issues with social jet lag, that can impact testosterone. We know disrupted sleep can, and sleep just isn't about sleep duration, right? That's the sleep quantity, but you have the sleep quality, sleep consistency, and sleep continuity. Okay. So it means like going through all the stages of your sleep, making sure you go to sleep and waking up at the same time, not just on the weekdays, but on the weekends too. They're all factors which come into this. And then I'm going through all the obvious basic ones first because we kind of have to. Yeah. The next is stress, right?
Yeah.
And with stress just isn't emotional stress. Stress is an ambiguous term used to encapsulate anything which challenges the homeostasis of the body, which basically means your body is designed to function and behave and be a certain way, physically, physiologically, emotionally, and even environmentally. And if we take your body out of those desired states, that is creating stress upon the body. And that level of stress, what you create upon the body, is going to compromise certain pathways, and it's going to prioritize the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which is the body's fight and flight mechanism. And that's going to pull it away from the hypothalamus gonadal axis, which stops you from producing testosterone, because there's no need to procreate when you're in a state of perceived threat and danger. Now, the next one here.
On that really quickly, I want to just get your thoughts on, because stress, people think, oh, well, this is just like work stress, finance stress, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But actually, it can be very physiologically driven by inflammation and, infections and stuff like this can also
100%.
drive that same response, right?
Yeah. Like even when we look into gut health, right, there's many factors of how poor gut health can impact your testosterone. We could have low stomach acid and therefore a hard time assimilating zinc. We could have issues with bile and therefore hard time breaking down of fats, which we aren't really going to optimize our cholesterol to pregnenolone and testosterone. We could have an overgrowth of bacteria, and we know from the overgrowth of bacteria, particularly gram-negative bacteria, we can have a higher rate of these endotoxins, these toxins produced inside the digestive system, such as lipopolysaccharides. And we know based on the data, lipopolysaccharide binding protein has been shown to lower testosterone. So there's many factors there. And these are all physiological stressors, which can go under the bucket of stress. But the interesting thing with stress, when we talk about emotional stress, there was a study done on 33,000 individuals, and it found that those which had high levels of stress and thought their stress was damaging for their health had a 44% increased chance of dying from all causes. But paradoxically, those which had high levels of stress but didn't think it was damaging to their health had a lower chance of dying from all causes.
Crazy. It's so it's such a reinforcement of the placebo effect and how that's kind of affecting everything, right? And I know that kind of study on that. I was smiling as you were saying it, because that's insane, really, isn't it, when you think about it? Purely the way
it's the whole perception.
Yeah. So purely the way you're thinking about the problem. Because most people, I'd say, if you ask most people, how do you feel like stress affects? Most people are going to say, yeah, well, it's not good. And I think that's because it's harped on about a lot as well. Like people say stress is bad, But actually, it's amazing to think that if you think of it differently, that's a totally different outcome in terms of how it impacts your body, right?
Yeah, imagine if we never taught that stress was bad. How would the health of society be?
Imagine we taught the opposite.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Well, we'd be more resilient. That's to start with, and we know resilience actually increases testosterone anyway.
That begs the question. That begs the question: if we were never taught that anything's bad for our health, would it be totally different? Would we be much healthier? If we were never taught the lack of sleep, the gut health, all these things?
Yeah,
that's an interesting thought. Like,
yeah, it is because we know that modern day stress is 1,000 times greater level of stress than what our ancestors used to experience, and that's because it's inescapable. We create a prison of our minds, and we can't move from that. So you know, just that factor alone, yeah, fair enough, we might be eating the wrong things and doing some wrong stuff there, but, you know, would we have a better net outcome? I would speculate possibly. If I was going to flip a coin, I'd say it's above 50%, but it'd be interesting, you know?
Maybe the lesson from this podcast is to just not care as much. You know?
I've just nuked the whole point of this. Yeah.
It's not what we intended for this, by the way.
No. You can still do healthy things, but then not stress as much about the unhealthy things. Control the controllables.
That's exactly, you know, that's one thing I like about, you know, what I've come to. When I first started off looking after myself, I was stressing about, you know, if I had one bit of food off, you know, unclean food, I would stress about it, right? When I was younger. The good thing about now is I always choose healthy food 99% of the time, but I don't care if I don't. Like, it doesn't affect me mentally or emotionally if I don't. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that we're reinforcing that through this topic here is actually the balance is fine. Like, prioritize good food, prioritize good habits, but don't stress if you don't sleep well one night or don't eat or eat.
It's the law of averages. That's what matters most.
Yeah, 100%. What else? Let's go through the list. We've touched upon like body composition, dropping that body fat levels.
Yeah,
you know, sleep, stress. Anything? Any other big ones? Any other big rocks?
Yeah, exercise. Yeah, so exercise is definitely going to be beneficial, like lifting heavy weights, you know, not overtraining, but like, you know, 3 to 4 times a week. That's going to be fantastic. It's actually going to increase androgen receptor sensitivity. So that's something there. We also have supporting thyroid, because particularly T3, one of the thyroid hormones, that helps again with androgen receptor sensitivity. So if you have low T3, that's going to be, you know, more problematic. You might show up as, you know, being adequate on your hormones, on your blood, but at the receptor site, it may not be working as well. So making sure that we have adequate zinc and selenium to support with that. And we can talk more on supplements and food in a second. But then we also have toxins, which is another one here too. So things like your phthalates and your BPA, we know that these can be heavily estrogenic. They're classed as xenoestrogens. So we would want to kind of limit this kind of toxic exposure, particularly to fragrances and things there too. Yeah. In fact, there's one study, interesting study. Okay, how am I gonna? Okay, there's 2 aspects. I'll just say one. So, with the study, there was a study, and it looked into maternal exposure to phthalates. Okay, and the maternal exposure to phthalates. Okay, I'm gonna say both of it. It led to the sons being a higher chance of being homosexual, but also having something called hypospadias, so a dysfunction with the penis. Yeah, so that's the maternal exposure to phthalates.
So basically, the mom, when pregnant, being exposed to fragrances.
Yeah.
I guess, run me through where you will typically find phthalates.
Hairdressers, one of the biggest ones.
Oh, really? So in all of the chemicals they're spraying around.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Perfume shops, hairdressers, they're the top 2.
And this is I want to kind of segue a little bit onto the allostatic load, right? We talk about this topic in terms of like the compounding stress from multiple angles. And I think it's hard when we're trying to kind of look into how damaging certain things are for us, because it's not just about that one thing, is it? Like, you talk about, like, we could probably deal with a little bit of phthalate exposure every now and then, not to say it's not going to be damaging, but the problem is that's not the only problem. There is problems at all angles. We have, you know, high levels of stress like never before. We are not moving as much. We're not getting as much daylight. We're not getting the same amount of nutrients in our food. We've got all this chemical exposure, and it's that load placed upon the body from multiple different angles, which causes the impact. And I think people will pull up studies and say, well, look, this doesn't affect the body in ways that you think, or people say. But when you add it to the massive, massive list from all angles, then it's having a big issue, a big problem. And it's about how we, you know, reduce those little stresses from all these angles, and that has a big impact overall, right? Because if you remove 100 of them, then you feel a lot better and you function a lot better, right?
Yeah, and it's like the whole analogy of the straw that broke the camel's back. You know, it's like you can load up all these things on, but, you know, at what point is your breaking point? You're not going to know until you break, right? So that's one factor. But then another factor to consider is pharmacokinetics. And it's like, how does this toxin respond in my body when I also have these other toxins? Then does it become more problematic, right? So there's that whole dynamic what we have to consider too, where we just view a toxin or a thing in isolation, but that's not how our body works. You know, we bioaccumulate metals. People are getting more and more aluminium in their body. How is that going to respond to certain things? So, you know, there's that what we have to pay attention to as well.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I want to go for a little bit of a myth busting, fact or fiction. I want to know what things, you know, because we'll get asked a lot, you know, supplements. What supplements? You know, are there supplements that will help to raise testosterone? And what do people need to think about if there are? And what are people wasting their money on, in your eyes?
Okay, so based on the RCTs, the randomized control trials, generally speaking, the supplements tend to only have a maximum, generally speaking, a maximum of about 20% lift on testosterone. Now, that's not, even though it doesn't sound like much, it can still be a lot, right? It can still be a lot, right? Okay, like 20% from, let's say, 20, you're going to be at 24. Okay, that's a difference, right? Okay, so it's still going to make a difference, but it's not the entirety of the be all and end all, so to speak. But there's a number of supplements which can be beneficial, and it's all about, you know, when and if. So you have things like Tonka Ali, right? Okay, and that's probably one of the most famous ones right now. And this can be, you know, beneficial for lowering sex hormone binding globulin, and sex hormone binding globulin binds onto around about, you know, 60%. It can be as low as 40%, but generally it's around 60% of testosterone, and it kind of gets testosterone in this little headlock, and it makes it non-bioavailable, right? Okay, so it can help to lower sex hormone binding globulin. But what also Tonka Ali can do is it can help to buffer that stress induced suppression of testosterone. So if someone's under the pump working loads, then yeah, maybe Tonka Ali could be quite good here. So it is good for those, you know, high stress environments or high SHBG. So if someone's got chronic fatigue, yeah, maybe. The challenge with this is there's risk of heavy metal contamination. So
because where it's come from. Is that right?
Yeah, Malaysia. So there's a higher risk in Malaysia. I mean, other places as well, but we've actually seen it where individuals have been taking a particular brand of Tonka Ali, and their ALT levels shot up from around 20 up to 50 plus. And it was just the exposure from the heavy metals, from the soil.
So, heavy metals?
We didn't do a heavy metal analysis, but after discontinuation from about 3 months, because it stayed persistently high, but it took about 3 months and it started to subside. That was the only variable which changed, because this person's very monotonous. So, and then they went back on and it shot back up again. So control test.
Definitely something going on, right?
Yeah, and that's something we always have to be mindful of, right? Another great one is boron, right? So boron's fantastic. Okay, so boron does a number of different things. It's been shown to increase testosterone, increase free testosterone. It does, outside of that, it helps with vitamin D activation, helps lower CRP, helps with bone density. It's really cool, right? It's fantastic. But it can lead to mineral imbalances if someone was to take that long term. So you'd only take like 10 milligrams. The literature generally shows 10 milligrams, right, as the dosage. The unfortunate thing is it's dosed at 3 milligrams usually, which means you're going to take 9 or 12. But you know, you take that and it can be fantastic, right? You do have some essential kind of prerequisites like zinc. You know, zinc is going to be a staple. If someone's deficient in zinc, you're going to see some challenges here, right? Because zinc's zinc's required for producing luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone's what helps convert cholesterol through to testosterone. So obviously we want to make sure someone's not deficient in zinc. So if they are, then supplementing it's going to be great, right? And it'll lift up the bar. I mean, we've seen the studies as well, and there was a study done, and it was done over 6 weeks on marginally deficient elderly men, and I think it lifted the testosterone by 50%, right?
Wow.
But elderly men, right, marginally deficient based on conventional standards, so it means heavily deficient based on our standards. But we can see rate limiting factors are the focus here. It's like, what's actually stopping your testosterone from being where it should be versus what can we do to make it better? There's a nuance in that. Like, why is the testosterone nowhere near where it should be? That's the focus. That's why we started today by discussing those 10 different conditions, because that's what's going to stop your testosterone from being where it should. Now, outside of that, you do have some other things. You have grapeseed extract, okay? And grapeseed extract can be fantastic if someone's got high levels of aromatase. So if someone's got a lot of testosterone being converted through to estrogen, that could be fantastic there. And usually we typically see that with someone with, you know, more body fat, so to speak. So that could be a great one. But there is a risk there with the grapeseed extract, and that's it's going to be the risk of the die-off. It can create a bit of die-off from as an antimicrobial effect, but it
Then
can also increase.
antimicrobial.
It can
I
have
didn't
an
know that.
antimicrobial effect, yeah, and it can have a bit of a risk of bleeding factors and stuff. And then the other one there is fenugreek, right? And that's a spice, you know. So fenugreek, you can actually have that as a food. There's certain foods which can be good for supporting testosterone, but fenugreek, that could be beneficial. But it's all about, you know, when you dose these certain things, so to speak.
And would you, with the fenugreek, is that something you take in supplement form? Is that something you would do just, you know, on the side of your dishes, or, you know, are you going to have a big enough impact from it doing that?
Yeah, both. Yeah, okay. So like when we look into foods, there's functional foods, and functional foods are, you know, the profiles, the nutrients to really support people with their health outcomes. And we're not going to just rely on supplements. So yeah, we'd still include fenugreek as part of their plan, possibly. You know, and same again with eggs, red meat, and some other things there like pumpkin seeds. But as a supplement, we have seen good benefits there. It's around about 17%, I think, of a lift on the RCTs.
That's actually a hell of a lot more than I would have thought with fenugreek, to be fair. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, and I think it also has some insulin sensitizing properties as
Mm,
well. So if someone does have kind of some of those insulin resistant based profiles, and
yeah.
they're having challenges with testosterone because of that, because you know, higher inflammation, poor nutrient partitioning, blah blah blah, then it could be beneficial then. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, and just before we kind of move on to the next fact or fiction, Shilajit, right? Everyone talks about Shilajit
Oh,
for
yeah.
testosterone, and people, I don't know, I feel like it's the one that people that, you know, harp on about having the most benefits when they take it. Like they feel different. And it's not typically something I would use for testosterone support, but what are your thoughts on it?
Great. Yeah. Great they brought this up. Um, I've not actively tried to look at the literature on Shilajit for testosterone, but I've read a lot of literature. You know, I've probably read about 3,000 published medical journals.
Mm,
I've not come across any profound benefits of Shilajit.
really?
Um, but I've also taken it myself and equally not come across any personal benefits myself
No.
either. Now, I haven't actively gone out to look into the literature, but exactly what you're saying, there's a lot of people online which earn a lot of commission from recommending supplements with big accounts. And it comes
Yeah.
back into that whole kind of contagious theory of, you know, social media where someone parrots something to be gospel and true, and then suddenly everyone believes it. So yeah, I don't take it. I haven't actively looked at the literature, but I've not come across any in the meantime.
No, and I think we spoke about the placebo effect. So maybe that's all it is when people are taking
Yeah,
it, all this
yeah.
stuff about how good it is, and it raises it by so and so, and then they're going, "Oh yeah, I can feel it as soon as they take it," and it's all
Mm.
placebo. It's interesting, but maybe that's all we need for
Oh,
placebo.
but it does help with the mitochondria. So maybe if people do have a benefit, right? So we know Shilajit can help with the mitochondria. We know the mitochondria helps with the conversion of cholesterol through to pregnenolone inside the Leydig cells. Maybe the people which had the biggest benefit were the ones with the worst mitochondrial health.
And that's before we move on to the next thing, that's so important in it to understand, because each one has their own unique mechanism of action. You spoke about
Mhm.
grapeseed for estrogen, you spoke about tonka ali for stress, but also for the SHBG, reducing SHBG. I think that's clearly the reason why, you know, one person takes tonka ali and feels no different, and the next person says, "Oh, it's the best thing ever. I feel really good,"
Mm.
because the mechanism of action with that particular compound was what they needed, and that's
Yeah.
why the blood work becomes so important to understand first and foremost, because without that understanding as to what the issue is for that individual, you are just kind of taking a random punt at which one is going to help the issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we have three philosophies that we really recommend to our students, right? One is seek to understand before being understood. It's borrowed from Stephen Covey's book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. The second, we have it's more important to understand the client than the goal the client has, and it's more important to understand the patient than the disease the patient has. That way we can truly make a client-centric approach rather than a generic approach. And client-centric approach means you're giving them what they need at the right time, because the right thing at the wrong time is actually the wrong thing.
Yeah. It makes so much sense. The next one, I have these are a bit more biohacky. These types of ones, like everyone's talking
That's
about stuff.
fine. That's fine.
So, icing the balls. We spoke about heat, and this is one thing I want to, because it makes sense, right? That heat affects, you know, testicular health. Because I always think, like, logically, why are the testicles hanging outside the body? Like, surely there's a reason for that, because it doesn't
Yeah.
really make much sense to have them so exposed when they're so sensitive, right? It would make much more sense to have them kind of tucked in and safe, right?
Yeah.
So must be a reason. I guess that's to do with the heat side of things.
Yes. Yes. But yeah. So with this, I've tried, the whole, icing your balls, multiple times a day for weeks. I've done that. I've enjoyed the pain. And again, notice no difference, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when we look into, again, the literature isn't substantiated. It's not reliable nor high quality. What I believe has happened is there's the concept of, hey, going into saunas or jacuzzis can lower sperm health and may damage testosterone. It's more so associated to sperm than testosterone, to be quite honest. But they look at it from one side of the fence and thinks, oh, well, if it gets too hot, then the other side of the fence must be true, where if it gets cold, it must be better. And I don't think it's as substantiated. There hasn't been any large-scale human studies, but,
I guess it's more just
true.
The absence of too much heat is what's more important than actually getting
That's it. Yeah, it's like, just don't make it worse. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That's the main.
You almost think, right? Like the way I always think is like, okay, as humans, we would have been walking outside without clothes on. That's how we would have been designed. Nowadays, we're sat inside, really, really hot temperatures, and we've got like multiple layers that will keep them warm at all times. And I do wonder if that is contributing. Like I can sit at this desk for 5-6 hours straight, 2 layers of clothes, keeping a lot of heat down there, right? And I wonder, is that contributing when we talk about heat? Because that wouldn't have naturally happened, right? At any point through humanity prior to modern life, that we'd be sat inside this kind of temperature like that. I guess, countries,
there's probably worse things which come from sitting. I mean, the average adult spends 18 years of their life sat down, right? Yeah. And that's going to have a huge impact on the lymphatic system. Yeah. So I'd be more considered about the lymphatic system around there as opposed to the temperature. The other risk factor is that a lot of people use their laptops on the lap by definition, and the EMFs and stuff that will do a lot of damage there to the testicles. So I think, there's possibly more things outside of the, icing of the testicles where people should be focusing on to really support them.
That's good to know. So you don't have to sit back on your balls for multiple hours a day. It's good to know. Because I've done that too, right? By the way, I've actually spent, periods of time. I have actually a ball ice pack in the fridge. So I can probably throw that away.
Well, what I would say is you could potentially, the time what I would best use that is when you do go in the sauna.
I was going to say, like, just to keep the temperature down. Yeah, that's probably where it is.
Yeah, you offset the bad rather than try to push it to the other side.
Yeah, that's good. That is good to know. So I'll keep it. The next one is light. We spoke about mitochondrial function. Now, red light is particularly good for mitochondrial function. Now, is there any truth in direct light exposure to the testicles? Maybe that's through, sunbathing out in the open, if you've got high walls and the neighbors can't see you, or whether that's from direct red light exposure to the area. Like, any truth behind this?
It's quite interesting because we know the testicles have a high density of vitamin D receptors. Okay, so there's a very high density of vitamin D receptors there in the testicles. Again, there's been no large-scale studies of people walking around with the balls out. So
I want to see that study. That would be a study to track.
It would be a weird one, wouldn't it? But yeah, there's been no large-scale studies, right? So again, we can speculate and we can theorize, and I think that's where a lot of people go, oh, well, there's a high density of vitamin D receptors, blah blah blah, and then people speak about this Jing and, all these kind of aspects there and yang energy and stuff. But I think ultimately, if we're coming from an evidence-based perspective, because what we say and what we recommend to our clients has to come from grounded evidence, we have to go with the undecided approach right now. And equally, even if it was so incredible, I'm sure we'd hear a lot more about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that probably is a bit... I feel like a lot of people would maybe not do it quite as much as the other stuff, even if they did find out that how good it was, because you've got to sit with your nuts out in the sun, or
you get your eyes out and your nuts out. Yeah.
How much do you believe psychology plays in this whole equation of testosterone?
Yeah, massively.
in terms of like the way we think, our own levels of kind of self-esteem and all of that side of things, like our role in society as well. Like, how do you feel like this impacts testosterone?
Yeah, I think the loss of testosterone's led to the loss of masculinity in society. I think that's jeopardized health and well-being as a mass level in society across nations, particularly Western nations. I think, we've been feminized and we've been exposed to so many things and equally taught so many ways to kind of reduce the competitiveness and the innate way of how we've been designed and evolved to be protectors and providers. And I think that's just led to the erosion of society, which basically means we can be controlled and subdued.
Very well put. Is what came
Yeah,
first? Was it the
yeah.
reduction in testosterone that was kind of led down this more feminization route, or is it that we've been feminized and then in turn lost testosterone?
Both definitely support either side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's that whole, I'm trying not to go down rabbit holes here.
Yeah, I can see a wormhole
But
opening up.
yeah, but like this whole thing at school where you get like participant medals and
Yeah,
stuff, that's terrible. If you did
yeah.
a shit job, you did a shit job, do better next time. Like you can't get a participation medal because these participation medals, they're just teaching people like not to drive and not to push harder and be better, So I think there's the conditioning from such a young age, right? And that's creating a massive problem. And now when we look into TV and media, particularly TV, we're seeing like the large level of feminization of male characters in children programs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's teaching them that this ideal character based off the child program is more feminizing. And I think this is ultimately changing the behavior. And we know the behavior changes the biology. And I think that's a big impact there.
Scary road. And just on that competition, like, you correct me if I'm wrong with this, but competition, being competitive actually raises testosterone. Like when you're put in a competitive environment, that raises testosterone levels, right?
Yeah, massively. So we can see, number one, when testosterone is higher, people are more competitive. If people are more competitive in the world today, it means maybe they would protect the values and the rights of which they're currently letting slip so much. Equally, if people are more competitive, they'd go out and do more and become better at certain things and achieve more in life, and that becomes problematic for certain cohorts of people. So ultimately, when we look at testosterone, what are the qualities, right, of testosterone? We've got strength, we've got providing, we've got protection, we've got discipline, we've got self-reliance, we've got boundaries, we've got integrity. These are all byproducts of having good testosterone. But unfortunately, when we look into society today, particularly in Western culture, they're eroded, largely speaking. People have just become weak. And I think that's one factor of that is just from society teaching certain values and stuff. And the other factor is poor dietary choices and high levels of inflammation and all these other factors there too. So yeah, we know that the higher the testosterone, the higher the likelihood of competitive behavior, and winning a competition itself increases testosterone. So ultimately, it's a behavioral response here is not only a byproduct of low testosterone, but if we behave different, I think we'd be able to support our testosterone.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting to touch upon that, how behavior in itself can influence the physiology, right? As in how you behave. And I think there's an amazing study of you'd have, I know you would have seen this. It was actually talked about in a TED Talks of a woman who spoke of just how you stand, your posture changes.
Yes, Amy Cuddy, I think it is.
So what? Yeah. So she talks about how even just that closed off look of like looking within yourself and unconfident, folded arms, stuff like this.
Yeah,
it drives up cortisol and reduces testosterone, and how different body stances and just standing in certain positions actually raises testosterone.
yeah.
That's one incredible example of how there's so many things at play, right?
And it makes sense. Like if your shoulders like rolled forward, you're not going to be able to breathe as much. You create an inhibition of the rib cage from expanding, so your lung capacity is limited. So you've got a hypoxic effect on the body that increases stress itself. But if you felt more confident and strong in your own body, you would expose these vital organs, not in a necessity to protect them. So you feel confident and strong and capable. So therefore, you're fine standing up, chest up, shoulders back, and exposing your heart, lungs to the outer world.
It's funny how it's like a cycle, right? Is if you feel unconfident, you close down, it creates more problems where that kind of exacerbates the issue. If you feel more confident, you open up, and that drives, it kind of feeds the the good vibes. It feeds the good cycle, right?
Which then comes back into exercise as well, right? Because if practice makes permanent, not perfect. And most people have sitting desk posture where they're working a 9 till 5. They're going into this highly kyphotic state, internally rotated shoulders. They're sitting down for prolonged periods of time. Well, that factor is lowering the testosterone. But when you start training and you start correcting their posture, not only is the exercise itself lifting the testosterone, but the corrected posture now from working the muscles more effectively is probably also going to compound to that testosterone net gain too.
It's funny because we've spoke about, we could have segued off in a million directions here and how different things affect testosterone, and that's the reality of it. I want to kind of just tie up and get a bit of a conclusion from you, but I just want to conclude and just leave on the topic of something I think is really important, and that is that I feel like it frustrates me to see like people normalizing low health standards across the board. It's becoming like, it's just even health and fitness professionals who are saying, it's okay to do this, but then ignoring the fact that health conditions are just getting worse and worse and worse.
Dude, let me jump in on that, please. Like the amount of influencers, what we see online, which I quote one of them, gut health is a fad. And then 1 to 2 years later, they're having operations on their bowel because of their challenges with their gut health. This isn't just an isolated event. I've seen 3 fitness influencers say, calories is the only thing which matters, or gut health is a fad, or something of this nature. And then within a 2-year period of time, they end up having an operation on their digestive system. I mean, where's the cognitive dissonance there? Anyway, sorry, I had to put that in there.
No. That's really, really relevant. It's on the money with exactly what I was saying. And I think, I see on, Instagram, people banging on calories are everything. As long as you get yourself in a calorie deficit, that's all that matters. And every health marker will improve. And it's just not the case. It's a big part if you're overweight and you need to lose weight, because the metabolic side of things, you need to improve that by losing that excess weight. However, like that is not all that needs to be done. Otherwise, we could just eat chocolate bars all day and lose weight and we'd be healthy as ever. But that's exactly not how it works. No. And I think like the biggest lesson is, but I think that's what often makes people go, oh, well, but I sleep 6.5 hours and that's all I need to think about. My head's on the pillow for that time. They go, God, do I really need to think about improving deep sleep and REM sleep and, getting in a consistent routine? Come on, like, do I really need to go to those lengths? Do I really need to think about, eating all these different nutrients? And I think it's because it's become so normalized to just not do that and have poor standards that almost seems like extreme measures, when really we're just trying to take things back to how we naturally would have lived, in line with the cycles of the sun, eating real food solely, no processed food, being outside. But people think, oh, you just, biohacking. It's just, these are just, extreme measures for extreme people with kind of all or nothing approaches to the thing. But really, that's not it at all. We're just trying to get back to the standard health that we should have been at before modern society took over, right?
And this is the thing with biohacking. It's quite interesting because really, when we look at biohacking, what they're doing is they're using modern day devices which emulate ancestral ways of living, right? If you look at we've got let's just say HBOT, so hyperbaric oxygen chamber. Well, maybe if we're out in the woods, clean oxygen, do you know what I mean? Or if we're looking into like
red light therapy, I do a lot, but
grounding mats, right? What this is it's basically, I have a bit of a frustration with a lot of these biohackers, and I think a lot of them have a level of escapism. They'll spend the majority of their day trying to live to 150, but they forget to live in the meantime, right? The devices, what they spend so much time recommending, talking about, just in its bare essence, are emulated from the way that we've been designed and evolved to live with nature, but we've become too foreign from that. So when we look at these biohackers, it's like just strip it back to the fucking basics and you'll save yourself a shitload of money and a lot of time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that's what I would often say. If we want to kind of learn how to live healthy lives, let's just go back in time and do what we were doing. Now, I think a lot of people throw the argument in, well, we live longer now than we ever did. And I think that's not to do with the same thing. That's to do with cleanliness, hygiene, less disease, less things like that, but not lifestyle related things.
Right? No, and I always say we're not living longer, we're dying longer. Like
Yeah, yeah,
what we're doing, like there's so many more comorbidities and polypharmacy in the world today that we're just adopting having a disease as normal, taking medication as normal, being depressed as normal. That's not the true essence of life, you know, and nor the true essence of health. Health is being able to experience all experiences from life to its fullest capacity without sacrifice. Most people don't have that opportunity. So if we don't have health, we can't really have optimal life, and we're just putting up with aches and pains for longer than we should be.
And I definitely think, and this is purely just kind of anecdotal, this is purely just from what I see, I definitely feel like we're about to go backwards in this, lifespan topic, because even when I was a kid, right, I'm only 31, so even when I was a child, I did not hear about people having anywhere near that. It didn't exist. My mum often talks about hay fever not really existing when she was younger.
Yeah.
And that's just one thing. And then like obviously obesity, you see the typical I love the picture of the Venice beach where you see like all these
Yeah,
guys,
yeah. 1975 to now.
yeah, to now,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think there's definitely a point where it's at that tipping point. And I feel like we are going to start this lifespan talk, not for everyone, because people who do pay attention may be okay, but for the general population, there's going to be a reversal in that, because we're living more processed lifestyles than ever, right?
And the thing is, well, what most people are so focused on is people is trying to extend their lifespan, but you can't extend your lifespan without increasing your health span.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you don't focus on the health first, it's not going to happen. Which comes back into what we've been discussing all the way through this, which is a health-first approach. But people are taking rapamycin, metformin, doing extended fasting, and they're ignoring these critical components of their health, which is ultimately holding them back. And it's like they're overstepping it. Same with the analogy what we said at the start, with people outsourcing their testosterone to TRT and not taking into account hemochromatosis, poor sleep, obesity, zinc deficiencies, calorie deficits, low thyroid. You just can't do that. You just can't take these biohacking things to try and live longer without focusing on the health first.
You can't get dry in the shower.
Yeah, again.
That's what people are doing. Like they're trying to get dry in the shower by taking the latest fad when there's much, much bigger problems to address first, basically, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, we'll tie this up because we've kind of, as we always do, we've gone on for longer than the hour.
I don't even know. How long?
No, there was many. We could have segued off in a million different directions, to be honest. But that was really, really good. A lot of value for anyone. The main thing I wanted to get from you was perspective, like a different perspective, to avoid people falling into the same issues where they kind of firstly blame testosterone for everything and think that that's the only possible reason they might be feeling run down, tired, all this kind of thing. Even the typical sex hormone symptoms are not necessarily a testosterone problem. And I want to just bring awareness to that, and I think we've done that. The main thing was like the root cause aspect. We spoke about the root cause being the most important thing, avoiding the reason why things are declining at such a rate in the first place, rather than thinking about the newest hacks and fads that we can throw in, which can work under circumstances, but never while you're still in that shower getting wet. You're never going to have an impact. So I think that was the biggest lesson I wanted people to take from this. And I guess for the listener, most of our guys are going to be 35 and above. Typically kind of falling into issues around, sex hormones, testosterone, and other areas of health. What would you say is the biggest lesson they should take from this particular talk?
Don't guess, get your blood work done.
Beautiful.
Simple as that. Because there's so many different delineations of what we spoke about, right? We spoke about poor sleep, obesity, hemochromatosis, prolactin. We spoke about thyroid, zinc deficiencies, GI issues, and there's so many different areas. And like we discovered, the health handbrake is the rate limiting factor, which determines if your testosterone is going to be good or not. And if you're trying all these different supplements, you could go through a process of elimination, and it's probably going to take you a year or two, and lots of thousands of dollars to try and guess, tens of thousands of dollars to guess, and you still might not get there, right? And once you achieve that, then you have to go through the whole process again to guess the next stage. So another couple of years and probably a few $10,000s to get there too. And you're just taking those step by step and just ultimately wasting your time and your money. Whereas you can condense all of that by getting your blood work done, actually seeing objectively what you need to focus on, and you can get results real fast.
I think that summarizes what you guys do with Institute of Health, right? Because you mentioned at the start, it's about marrying traditional therapies with modern advances is basically what you talk about. And that summarizes what you've just said. You're using modern advances of, getting the data from blood work and these very, very incredible tools that we have to understand health much more clearly. But then we're actually not necessarily using medications and modern biohacks and fads to address the issue. We're actually just going back in time to what we should innately be doing, but with more clarity around what that issue is, right? And I think that's a perfect way to kind of put it, is get the data and remove the guesswork, and you'll have your answers there, right?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, there's so many possible considerations. You just need to work with n equals 1 in this case, and that n equals 1 is you, and we have to work with you with the right thing at the right time. And that's where, if anyone does have low testosterone, they should definitely reach out to Dom, so you can do what you do best and support them with that.
Beautiful. Look, I massively appreciate you for coming on. That was another jam-packed men's health podcast, loads of value for anyone kind of interested in this area. I feel like we've got another 10 hours to talk about different things, and I would love to have you back on it another time, but for now we'll leave it there, and we'll reconvene at another time, I'm sure. All right.
Sure. And if there is any requests, if people do have any requests, message maybe even myself or Dom if you wanted to, and then that way we can find out what the people want, if they do want a particular topic covered, which we haven't discussed. Yeah,
that would be amazing. I know there's so much we could talk about, so I think let's hear it from the people themselves, and maybe we'll come back to it. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this opportunity, and always it's fantastic speaking with you and having a great time just nerding out about health and just seeing how we both get on. So I really appreciate you, Dom, and you're doing some incredible things in regards to men's health, testosterone, body composition. It's really cool, and it's not just limited to the UK, it's all over the world, and people are recognizing that and seeing the knowledge what you have and the impact what you're creating. So well done, man. It's awesome to see. Look, I also want to give you appreciation for that, because you really were the person who opened my eyes to that level of thinking. Like, I think one thing for anyone who's interested in this side of things is, like, I was a health and fitness coach for a long time, but quite unfulfilled in doing it, in the sense that, yes, I would get people abs and biceps and, looking good and this kind of thing, but it felt so surface level to it. And I'm all for that, by the way. I want people to look and feel good. I think that's a big part of health. I'm not one of these people that says it don't matter what you look like. I think it does. I think we should care about that. It's human nature. But it just wasn't fulfilling, in the sense that, the rest of it wasn't really coming with it. And you actually were the one who put me onto this journey from fixing me when I essentially hit burnout from, 5 a.m. starts, 9 p.m. finishes running my gym, and then COVID hit. Everything went downhill from there. And after 6 months of struggling with my health, you actually, you may or may not remember this, but we ran my blood panel for the first time at this, comprehensive level. And it wasn't overly complex. You just said, these habits, this training, these supplements, go away, do that. And then I think, honestly, 4 to 5 to 6 weeks later, after feel like I was never coming out of this place, I felt back. Like, I felt like I'm good. I feel good again. Like, I wasn't 100%, but I was like, I'm actually showing up to work, motivated. I'm actually, I had this sense of flatness. I kind of understand what depression might feel like after this period of time, because I couldn't enjoy anything. There was no sense of enjoyment from spending time with my kids, from holidays. I had no enjoyment. It was just impossible to feel that positivity, and I had no idea it was kind of a physiological issue. I just thought, like, I don't know what the hell is going on. And
you just think it's part of running a business.
Yeah.
But it's the business owner's curse.
It is, but when you know how to look after yourself, I don't get that anymore. Like, I don't get that burnout feeling anymore. I've done this very intensely similar kind of work routines since that, and I don't get that level of burnout anymore like I got then. It just isn't the same, and it's because I still work the same, but my my level of self-care, since understanding this deeper level, is just much better, and I've got you to thank for that. So I also want to give you appreciation for actually setting me off on this journey, because that's kind of what's got us to where we are now in terms of the Alpha Twin program.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, man. And I remember all of our conversations and stuff. So it's awesome to be reminded of them.
Beautiful. Well, we'll tie up there, and I'd love to reconvene at some point, but for now,
awesome. Brilliant. Thank you.